everyone. Welcome to my week 11 video. And in this week's video, I want to talk to you first about the elements of drama, and then I want to explain the paper 3 assignment sheet, which of course is the very last major paper that we'll be writing in the course. So if you have made it up to this point, you are doing incredibly well, and don't give up now, whatever you do. If you want to follow along with me in looking at the elements of drama, please click on Content up at the top of our Brightspace course page, and then on Course Documents, and then you'll have to hit Load More, and then you'll see the elements of drama. So we all know what drama is, right? It's a story told through action and dialogue by actors who are impersonating characters. They're pretending to be someone else. So drama has certain conventions, certain traditions and ideas that we have to accept, and they require what Coleridge called a willing suspension of disbelief. So we have to accept the fact of impersonation or representation, that these people before us, whether they're up on a stage in the theater or whether we're watching a film, whether we're watching a television show, however they're performing, whatever the medium is, that they are impersonating or representing themselves as something that they actually are not. And the stage has to be regarded as the actual scene or setting. So we have to put ourselves into this dramatic situation and imagine that this is real. We have to accept the conventions of what is called asides, and this particular term will come back to haunt you on the short exam on literary terms that is coming up. So asides are lines spoken by an actor that are intended to be heard by the audience, but not by the other actors on the stage. So when you hear that word aside, think of this. I'm taking you aside and I'm telling you something that I don't want anyone else to know. So the actor would speak to the audience, but the other actors on the stage are just sort of oblivious and they don't hear what that actor is saying. Or soliloquies. That's another convention we have to accept. And so think soliloquy, solitary. So that's a character talking when alone, right? So the actor may be on the stage, or the actor may be in a film kind of talking to himself or herself, and you can hear his or her inner thoughts. Now, I don't know if you talk to yourself, but I'm guilty, and I often will do it when I'm driving. And for some unknown, God-forsaken reason, I will refer to myself as we. Like I'll be driving along, I'll be like, we really need to get those papers graded when we get home. And all of a sudden, I'll be like, wait, what? I just called myself we. How weird is this? My father used to say, Shug, that was his nickname for me, it's okay if you talk to yourself. It's when you start answering yourself that you better become worried. So soliloquies, a character talking when alone. We might need to accept the fact that just ordinary people are speaking in highly poetic language. So if it's a Shakespearean play, you might have an actor who is portraying the role of someone who's not a fancy person, not a king or a queen, but nevertheless speaking in this poetic language. We have to accept the idea that actors on the stage in theater always speak more loudly, than is natural. So more loudly than natural, because they're projecting their voices so that people all over that theater can hear them. Now, I have a daughter, a wonderful grown daughter named Marissa Ireland, and she's now a country Americana singer-songwriter, but she was a child actor. And we actually lived in Los Angeles for 10 years, and she acted there. And before that, she did a lot of musical theater and film and things like that in Nashville, and she started out on the stage. So when she went to California and she began doing television and film, the people who were in charge, the directors and producers, had to say to her, Marissa, You're not on the stage anymore. You don't have to project your voice anymore. So you can calm that down. We have to accept the possibility of in medias res, and that's a Latin term that means into the middle of affairs. And so that refers, that Latin term, to a literary technique in which the story actually begins after the action has already started. And so the explanation of the plot, what's happening in the play or the film, the characters' roles, the importance of the setting, how every character connects to the other characters, and so on, all of that is left to be revealed to us via flashback, or through maybe a character's thoughts, or maybe dialogue, or a reverse chronology where the story is told backwards. So if you think about it, you've probably been to the movies and seen a film where that technique of in medias res is happening, or maybe you have seen it in a television program. So for example, you might turn on one of the crime shows, and maybe the crime is happening, right? There's action happening, but you don't know what led up to it. You're not for sure what the cause of it is. All of that is left to be revealed to you later on. Another convention of drama is that it requires a balance between empathy, our ability to feel for these characters, and aesthetic distance. So remember, we're viewing art here, not real life, although the two can certainly mirror each other and feed off each other, and they do. And also the conventions of drama require that we remember the fact that the reading of dramatic literature, so the reading of a screenplay, is usually a poor alternative to actually watching the play in the theater or watching the film version. And so in this unit, we're going to be doing both. We're going to be reading a novel based on the screenplay of the Steven Spielberg film Amistad, but we're also going to be watching the film. And I think you'll find that, even though reading is wonderful, that actually watching that film come to life before you is more riveting, because that's how it's written to be. And think about this too. Anytime you watch your favorite TV show, now I'm a huge This Is Us fan. I think it's awesome. And I'm also a huge Young and the Restless fan. And much to my husband's dismay, but he likes the Hallmark movies, much to my dismay. So we each have our own little favorite thing, right, that we like. But remember, all of those television shows and films that you love begin with writing, creative writing. And that's what we're studying here. So drama has elements that bring it alive, that writers work with, just like poetry does and just like fiction does. And these sheets, the 3 sheets, the elements of fiction, the elements of poetry, and the elements of drama that we have reviewed at the beginning of each of our 3 units, some of the terminology is going to come back and haunt you on that exam on literary terms. And you should be using these terms in the writing of your major papers. So we know that plot is just what happens in a play or a film, right? Or a short story or a poem. So things to ask yourself about plot: is this play or film following a classical structure, sort of beginning at the beginning? Or is it an example of in medias res, starting in the middle of affairs? And I think you're going to find that our film version of Amistad starts in the middle of affairs. What is the function of each act and scene? How are they related to each other? How do they sort of build on each other? What is the essential problem or conflict? We've got to have that conflict in there to pique our interest. Where's the climax? So the high point of the piece that gains your interest the most, or the turning point in that play or film. And does the resolution seem appropriate and satisfactory to you? Compare the end of the play or film back with the beginning. What changes have happened? Because that's going to help you reveal theme. In what ways does the opening act, the very first thing that you see on the stage or in the film or in the screenplay, serve the important purpose of exposition? And that's a term that refers to explaining to the reader what's already happened, what you need to know, right, at the beginning. So background information. What important things might have already taken place? And then does the play contain subplots? What is their relationship to the main action, the main plot that's going on? Then think about character, an element of drama. So who is the protagonist, the main character through whose eyes we're seeing everything? And I think that we could say that with Amistad, the protagonist is Cinque. Who is the antagonist? Who's a character that's maybe directly opposed to the protagonist? Or it may be a force that that character is up against. It may be the weather. It may be a social problem. It may be slavery. What is the function of the other major characters and minor characters in the play? Sometimes you have a character whose job is just to sort of bring comedic relief a little bit. What are the methods, or what methods are used to establish and reveal character? And character's pretty much always revealed by the character's own words, the character's own behaviors, how the character looks, other characters' responses to that character, other characters' words and thoughts about that character, and narrative comments. So think about the dialogue. So how does the dialogue of the characters differ? So do you have one character who maybe speaks very properly and who's clearly, very intellectual, and maybe you have another one who talks like she come from Maester Ridge? How do those differences sort of aid in characterization? What stylistic devices are contributing to the play's dialogue? So there might be sort of a poetic rhythm to the dialogue. There might be repetition of certain words. And you'll see that with Amistad, where Cinque, in that very moving scene, stands up in the courtroom and says, "Give us free, give us free." And I won't tell you anything more about that because I don't want to spoil it for you. Maybe you might see puns or plays on words, comparisons, allusion, imagery, irony, symbolism, all the same techniques that we've seen in fiction and in poetry can apply here pretty much. Setting is the next thing to think about, the next element of drama. What's the place, time, and place? To what extent does setting aid in our understanding of the characters, in establishing and sustaining the atmosphere, and in influencing the plot or the main theme? And then, of course, the big question that we're always after is, what is the theme, right? What's the underlying universal message to which we all relate? How is it presented? Is it stated outright or is it implied? What is the universal value or significance of that play's theme? So here are a few other aspects to consider when you're evaluating drama. Consider the title again. What clues does it provide to the main theme or ideas? So if you're looking at that title, Amistad, see if you can figure out what that word means. That's going to give you some clues. To what extent does the playwright, notice the spelling of that word, Playwright. That's the writer of a play. We don't call that person the playwright, Write, or the playwriter. We call him or her the playwright, Wright. So if you use that term in your paper, make sure you spell it correctly, and that term refers to the writer of a play or a screenplay. So to what extent does that playwright make use of conventions like asides, soliloquies, or a chorus? Here's another term that's going to haunt you on that exam on literary terms. So when you and I think of a chorus, we think of a group of singers, right? But in drama, in theater, this term refers to a group of actors who function as a unit. So they're not necessarily singing. And this was a characteristic feature of Greek tragedy. So the members of the chorus share a common identity, right? And in some plays, they participate directly in the action. In others, they're restricted sort of to the sidelines. They observe the action and they comment on it. But they function as a unit. And then what about the three unities of time, place, and action? And I will ask you about that on that exam on literary terms. So if you look at the footnotes here, the classical unities, they were also called the Three Unities, are rules for drama that Aristotle created in his work Poetics. However, the three unities or three classic unities were derived from a misreading of his work Poetics. So people misread this. And in their neoclassical form, here they are. So the unity of action. A play should have one main action that it follows with no or few subplots. Well, we know that in many of the plays we see now, if you've ever been to a Broadway play or musical, it's a wonderful experience. Or even if you've just seen a school play, or if you are looking at a film or a television show, that film or that episode on that show or that play will generally have subplots along with the main plot that's happening. The unity of place. So in the misreading, the rule says a play should cover a single physical space, pardon me, and should not attempt to compress geography, nor should the stage represent more than one place. Well, again, you know, if you've ever seen a play on stage, and if also we're talking about a film or an episode from a television show, you know, there are many spaces covered usually in that screenplay or you know, on that stage, and the stage can be changed and represent many different places. The unity of time, the misreading said the action in a play should take place over no more than 24 hours. Well, my gosh, there are some very successful plays who compress decades into one single play. So French scholars read and misinterpreted Aristotle's Poetics, and that led to all of this bitter bickering between playwrights who wanted to defy the conventions and those who wanted to adhere to them. So you do want to think about the functions of those conventions. You want to identify the major physical actions of the play and explain their significance. So what auditory and visual elements are important? Because now you're watching this, right, and you're listening to it. And then what help do the stage directions provide? So normally, if you've got a screenplay, you're going to have stage directions. So Jane enters from stage left looking very upset and frustrated, right? And so those are just elements of drama that will be helpful to you as you approach this paper. And now I want us to look at the Paper 3 assignment sheet. So to find it, you'll go again to course documents, you'll go to major paper assignments and related materials, and you'll click on Paper 3 assignment sheet. And I'm doing that right now, in fact, and it's taking it just a moment. So for this last major paper in the class, you'll write a 3 to 4 page literary analysis of the film version of Amistad that we're all viewing together. So it must be at least 3 full pages. If it goes over that amount, that's fine. But if it's under that amount, then points will be deducted. And you can also certainly quote from Alex Pate's novel, which is based on the screenplay of Amistad. So you can use one or both of those works as you're writing. And note that Pate's first name, it's a very unusual spelling. It's spelled Alexs. And your computer may auto-correct that to Alexis. That happened to me. So you want to make sure in your paper that if you're mentioning Pate as the writer of this novel that's based on the screenplay, that you spell his, and he is a he, first name correctly, Alexs. And so here are 3 different ways, 3 different options from which you could choose to approach this paper. You could analyze a character or more than one character from the film and or the novel. So when you do that, remember the way that we do that is to consider that character's words and behaviors, actions. What other characters say about him or her? So their responses to the character and the character's physical description. So character inevitably connects to theme. So how does the character you're analyzing contribute to the overall theme of that work? What do the critics have to say about their analysis of this character or these characters that you have chosen? And how does the character reveal or provoke ideas of enslavement, going back to our class theme? And then the second option would be to analyze, and when we use that word analyze, we mean break down, right, the parts to make it understandable. The main and secondary themes in Amistad. So how are all the elements of drama kind of combining together to reveal theme. So setting, plot, character, rising, falling action, dialogue, irony, all of the elements of drama can connect together to reveal themes. And then what do the critics have to say about their analysis of the themes in the film? And again, you can certainly quote from Pate to cement your ideas. And then the third option is to compare and contrast the film version of Amistad with one other text that we have read this semester. So it could be a text from our fiction unit or from our poetry unit. What similarities do they share? What differences are you noticing? So you want to, again, consider the elements of drama in film that we're discussing together and refer to that elements of drama sheet that we just talked about and how to analyze a film. That's another document that will be very helpful. So again, what do the critics have to say about their own analysis of each of these texts or works or films? So here are the important dates. On Monday, the 23rd of November, that will be our idea workshop day for paper 3. You will, as always, fill out the questions, your answers to the idea worksheet questions, and upload them under the assignments tab before 11:59 p.m. On the 25th of November, that's a self-review day for paper 3. So it takes the place of a peer review or a pre-writing day. And so before 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday night, the 25th, you want to complete the self-review. You'll go to discussions and look for the week 14 self-review for paper 3 discussion board and follow the directions there. And you'll be prompted to carefully review your own writing and to compare it back with my comments on a previously graded paper to make sure that you're not making some of the same errors. And remember, 10 points are deducted from your paper 3 grade if you don't submit that draft and complete that process by 11:59 p.m. on the 25th. And then on Monday the 30th, the final draft of paper 3 is due before 11:59 p.m. So after you've completed your self-review, then you'll submit that final draft. And remember, 10 points are deducted from your paper grade for every calendar day that paper is late, including the due date and weekends, and papers aren't accepted after 5 days. So specifics, again, at least 3 pages in length. You can go over that. As always, you're going to type it, double space it in Times New Roman 12-point font with standard margins. So for this paper assignment, you need to document your main source, which would be the film version of Amistad, depending on which option you choose, and or Pate's novel version of Amistad. Obviously, if you choose option 3, you'll document the film and or the novel and the text that you're comparing it to. And then, in addition, you need to find 2 secondary sources. So this means that you'll need to incorporate quotations and or paraphrases citing within your paper, and then also that separate works cited sheet at the end of your paper using correct MLA formatting. It means you have to choose 2 additional sources in addition to the film and or the novel, and or a text in addition if you're doing option 3. So this would consist of 2 different versions of a critical analysis from an expert on your chosen option, whether it's character theme or compare contrast between Amistad and another text that we've read this semester. So you can use the following: maybe a credible interview with the film's author or director, biographical information on the film's author or director, and or historical information regarding enslavement that connects to the film or the text. You can locate these critical articles online through the Pellissippi Library databases or through other credible means. Remember that you use your secondary sources to support your claim, or you can disagree with those sources to help prove your claim. And there are lots of wonderful sources that are available out there. Your goal in paper 3 is to write a careful analysis of one of the noted elements above as it's relating to Amistad, one of those 3 options. So you're attempting to explain how one of those elements is working in the film to further our understanding of overall meaning, of theme, essentially. So maybe character, maybe you're looking at all the themes themselves, or a compare and contrast of two works if choosing that third option. And you want to choose your two additional sources from the following: critical evaluations, maybe from professional critics, credible interviews, as we said before, biographical information, and or historical information. So I list for you the questions that you want to ask yourself as you're writing. So go through those questions as you're writing and make sure that you are staying on track by doing what you need to be doing. And then I give you examples of a possible thesis and game plan for each of the three options. And the first one, of course, is character. And the second one is theme. And the third one is comparing and contrasting Amistad to the Facebook Sonnet by Sherman Alexie. But you could certainly choose, any text from Unit 1 or 2 that we've looked at. I also give you at the end of this sheet the TBR student learning outcomes that are to be evaluated in Paper 3, just in case you are curious about that. So I hope that this is helpful to you. And obviously the other primary things that you want to make sure you do this week are to complete the pre-writing for Paper 2 discussion board. Very important. And after you've received your feedback on that, then you're going to submit the final draft of Paper 2. That should happen Monday the 9th. And so then kind of looking ahead to week 12, I will be doing a video on the review for the exam on literary terms and on how to analyze a film, which will be important for you. So thanks for your time and attention. I hope that this has been helpful. Have a great week.